Hi everybody, and welcome to a very special cooking episode of the Arctic Reptile Ranch. We're not really going to be cooking during this episode. Well, maybe. I guess I am cooking during this episode, but it's not about cooking. See, I'm throwing this brisket on, and as anybody that's ever cooked a brisket knows, it's going to take hours. So during that time, while it's in here warming up and getting smoked, we're going to talk about some of the reptiles that I keep inside, as opposed to all the tortoises that live out here in the yard. So today's episode, we're going to talk about a couple of lizards that I keep. They're called Mossy Leaftail Geckos. So let me throw this on here and we'll head inside and take a look at these amazing little critters. All right, everybody, let's go inside. Now that I've got that brisket smoking, I've got a little bit of time to show you guys my Mossy Leaftail Geckos. Their genus and species name is Uroplatus, which is the same genus name for all leaftail geckos that come from Madagascar. This particular type of Mossy Leaftail Gecko is Uroplatus sikorae. There is another type of Mossy Leaftail Gecko from Madagascar, and they're also Uroplatus, but their species name is Samedi, and those are often referred to as southern Mossy Leaftail Geckos, and these are just simply called Mossy Leaftail Geckos. They're in a pretty spacious cage. This is an Exoterra. It's 24 inches wide, 36 inches tall, and 18 inches deep. This gives them a lot of vertical room because they're an arboreal species. They live on vines, on the sides of trees and whatnot. I keep it planted very well. In fact, this cage has been planted for about 3 years before I ever decided to put anything inside into the cage itself. And these guys have been with me for a few months now. Everything in this cage that you see plant-wise is alive. There are pothos growing in here. There are a type of swordtail plant that's growing in here. I have spider plants in here, a Monte Carlo species of vine growing down from here, and of course living moss, some dead moss, but mostly living moss. And so the respiration of all these plants helps with humidity. But another tool that I use is the misting system that I have hooked up to my enclosures. It's a Mist King system. Now, of course, in a cage that has a lot of humidity, air stagnation can be a problem. So to prevent stagnating air, you can see I have this computer fan up here, and that's plugged in, or it's powered via USB, just like plugging in a phone to a charger. And so this helps pull the air out. So right now, this enclosure is at 88% humidity and 74.5 degrees. So along with needing very high humidity levels, these guys actually need really low temperatures. So cages in the 70s that drop down into the 60s at night is actually perfect for these guys. Now that I've told you a little bit about this species, I'm going to go ahead and take one out, because even though they're in plain view, they're really hard to see. So we'll get one out and zoom in a little bit closer and talk about some of their unique physical features. So in front of us, we have two Mossy Leaftail Geckos. I've put them on this piece of cork bark with moss on it so you can see just how insanely amazing they're able to blend in. The one over here is the female, and this one is the male. Other than their coloration, what's special about these guys? Well, as their name suggests, they're a leaf-tailed gecko. So their tails look like leaves. Along their bodies, they have a fringe, and I'll try to get a close-up for you so you can see that a little bit better. And what that fringe on their body does is it allows their torsos and their face and their arms to kind of melt in to the bark that they're leaning on. It breaks up the shadows so you really don't get to see the shape of the animal, which helps in its camouflage. From this point of view, on the male, we can see the fringe that runs along his bottom jawline and almost makes up a beard. Now, of course, in the female, when she had her face up against the vine, it helped her blend in. It helped break up the shadow. But when you move light just right, it kind of pronounces it when they're looking down and looking at stuff, when they don't have their face flush up against whatever it is they're resting on for the day. And amazingly, there are his paws, just, again, blending in and just melting away into the vine that he's attached himself to for today's roosting. And when I move the light around, you can see the fringes a little bit better. You can see their shadow. As I mentioned, these guys come from Madagascar, and they're one of 2 species of Mossy Leaftail geckos, while the other species is often referred to as Southern Mossy Leaftail Gecko. While they inhabit basically the same range on the eastern side of Madagascar, this species in front of you comes from higher elevations than the other species does. So instead of northern and southern, more appropriately would be a highland and a lowland. These 2 are full grown. They can get a little bit more size to them. When it comes to feeding, they're bug eaters. In my care, they receive crickets and roaches. I've seen them hunting the isopods, the people call them roly-polies, that I have inside that enclosure. These guys are easy enough to handle. They are geckos, so they can bite, though as long as you handle them gently, they're much less inclined to bite you. But for the most part, this species isn't much of a species that is used to being handled. These guys, like a lot of reptiles, are awesome display animals, but they're really not what I would consider a pet. So if they're not a pet, why keep them? Well, just like nearly everything else in Madagascar, these guys are becoming exceedingly rare. They're not really considered critically endangered yet, or they have been collected pretty heavily in the past. You want to try to reproduce them. That's why I currently have a male and female, and I'm on the lookout for another female, just so I can reproduce these guys to take the pressure off of the wild populations that people try to collect. Now you might notice these guys lick stuff, very similar to snakes and other lizards. They do have a Jacobson organ that's pretty well developed, though not so much as your average snake. Another very special feature of these animals is their ability to change colors. Now, they don't have a wide variety of chromatophores the way a chameleon has. These guys have a specialized type of chromatophore called a melanophore. So really, all they're doing is increasing or decreasing the amount of light or dark in their skin. And a melanophore is a modified smooth muscle. So smooth muscles are the muscles inside of our bodies that work on their own. Like when you swallow something, the muscles that move food through your digestive system, those are smooth muscles. So they're the tiny cells, the melanophore cells. They receive signals from the body that says, hey, it's daytime or it's nighttime, and their colors change. When they are in a state of alertness, that might also trigger them to change. And it's a twofold process. It's a muscle contraction as well as a chemical change. The chemical required is calcium. Just like when we move our muscles, calcium is at work. When their melanophores are stimulated, calcium is responsible for making them move. So these guys have had some outside time. We're going to put them back in and just talk about them inside their enclosure now. As you can see, even in their enclosure, we know where they are, but they just, every step they take, they blend in better and better with their environment. One pleasant coincidence in using this cage is that while of course she's a mossy leaftail gecko, her pattern and a lot of the colors in her pattern blend in very well with that back wall. So there's times when it takes me 5 or 6 minutes to find her and she's right in front of my face, just on the back wall. The male tends to go in slightly darker areas because that matches his body a little bit more. So I find him upside down and behind the sticks more often than not. Another very important thing to know about this species of gecko is that they're nocturnal. You know, the large eyes and the vertical pupils are usually a dead giveaway that an animal hunts well at night or can see very well at night. So that's most likely their natural waking period. Now, as we can see, the female has taken a semi-classic nose down posture, and like I mentioned, they just melt into the backgrounds. Can you see her? She's right there. As she resumes her daytime sleep, the melanophores will relax and reduce the amount of melanin inside of them. She turns an almost white color during the daytime. So, if you want to keep Mossy Leaftail geckos, what are some things you need to know and remember? Like I said, these guys are great display animals, sort of. I mean, they're kind of hard to find in their displays. But they're really not something you want to take out and show off to your friends or, carry around your house. It's probably going to be more stressful to them than you would expect. Just consider yourself King Kong, and these little guys are the citizens of New York. It's the same idea, something giant. They don't know that we are not a predator. They don't know that we're not trying to eat them every time that we grab them. So that's why their natural reaction is to freeze or flee. Also, as I mentioned, they require a lot of humidity. They require low temperatures, so you may not even need to get a heat lamp. Something that a lot of people don't agree on is whether or not they need UVB. The lights I'm using are providing UVB. I have a T5 strip here, just like I use on my tortoises. And behind that, or actually in the same unit, are some LEDs. There's white, red, and blue. The red ones are good for plant growth, as are the white ones. The blue ones I could use at nighttime. I just turn all the lights off because I think that's better for them. But even though these guys are nocturnal and they don't run around in the sunlight the way a lot of other lizards do, as you can see, they kind of just rest up on stuff during the daytime. And where they come from in the jungle, yeah, it's a dense jungle, but light still comes down through and hits certain areas. So as they need to be warmer, they would move there. So they're still getting some amount of UVB in the wild. So while some people have kept these for a long time without a UVB light and they seem to do well enough even reproducing, having a UVB light on there can't hurt. And at the very least, all the lighting is helping your plants grow. Another really smart idea is to have your cage ready for the animal long before you ever get it. So that requires you to read about them, learn up on the animal, and make them an environment that's good for them. When I finally decided to put creatures in here, I looked around at some of the stuff that I really like and thought, okay, well, what could actually go into this enclosure? What would fit really well in here? And as I thought more about it, I figured this might be great for some type of tree frog or some type of gecko. That's why I eventually purchased these geckos to live in this enclosure. There's another enclosure down here that's waiting for its inhabitant. It will get here eventually, and I'll probably show you guys that. I might even do an unboxing video on it, we'll see. But even down here, I'm trying to get the plants established and let some stuff grow in before the little guy that's going to go in this little one ever gets to my house. And just like many geckos, like I mentioned, these guys eat bugs, so that means you're going to have to keep crickets, roaches, various fly larvae, butterworms, hornworms, stuff like that. Anything small and crawly, these guys will probably eat. And the more variety, the better. It is a good idea to dust them with calcium because, as I mentioned, calcium is very important in their coloration. It's, of course, also important for them if you're trying to breed because they need the extra calcium for egg laying. Of course, as I've mentioned in many of my other videos, in a living creature, calcium is just insanely important for so many different bodily functions. I hope you've enjoyed learning about the Madagascar leaftail geckos. There are about 12 or 13 different species out there, so there are plenty available in the pet trade. If you like these guys or you're interested in them, there aren't very many books on them, but there are plenty of websites where you can learn more than what I've explained to you with this species. So, if you've enjoyed this video, go ahead and give it a like. If you're not already a subscriber, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. And if you have reptile friends out there that haven't seen this video, share it with them. Give them a little something interesting to enjoy. Until we see each other again, take care of yourself. Have a great day, and I encourage you to grab a book or use an internet search engine and learn all that you can about your favorite animals.